Hey folks, Matt Colville here. This is going to be a fun video. This video is about the classes you can play in our new RPG. We are going to crowdfunding for this game in December. There's a link you can click below if you want to get an alert when the campaign goes live. But this isn't the crowdfunding video. This is the classes video. This is based on a Patreon post we uploaded months ago, and I'm really glad we waited to turn that post into a video because it means now I can tell you stories about playing these classes in our playtest. Well, some of the classes. But fair warning, there's still a lot of stuff in flux. We are taking the time to really dial in the core experience. That is the power of our Patreon. Our patrons want to watch the sausage being made, so they get to see all the dead ends that we went down. The stuff we got excited by that turned out didn't work. The stuff we discovered and is working. Does that sound fun? It's plenty fun. There's tons of great discussion in our patrons only Discord. If you have the funds, come on by the Patreon. We think you will like it. So our game, you will not be surprised, is class-based. We don't know how many classes we'll have in the core rules, and we won't know until like late next year, probably, because it's going to have a lot to do with word count. I am 100% sure we have cool ideas for classes that will not fit into the core rules. That just means if the game does well, we get to make more classes. We like making classes. It is fun. But it's not random which classes will be in the core rules. The limit is page count, so we focus on the core classes we think are necessary to deliver a broad fantasy. And then we add classes in reverse order of how weird they are. After the first 4 or 5, it's not a science. Sometimes a very weird class like the operator, no spoilers, we have a really strong idea for how it should work, and that means it might end up in the rules when something less weird but also less fun to design doesn't make it. But the basic archetypes should be in there with, maybe one exception. So let's get started. The Tactician. This is a class I believe very strongly in. This is our classic warrior archetype. We think the name, Tactician, is just way better than fighter. The fantasy of being a tactical genius who makes the team fight better and sees each encounter as a puzzle to solve is a very strong one. Now, none of this design is final. Everything I'm talking about here is subject to change. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how clever we are. If it's not fun, we're going to monkey with it until it is. But the Tactician is already working pretty well. It'll get tweaked a lot to dial in the fun, but it is already basically working. You are not a high DPS class. You're more of a leader. You can grant your allies free attacks, free movement, free warlordy if you played 4th edition. Think Zoga Borhart from Dusk. You also have a taunt and a mark. Now, we don't think you get both of these at first level. We think you pick one, and then maybe you get the other one at second level, and then you have both. Or maybe that choice is one of the things that determines what subclass you are when you level up. That all remains to be seen. I guess I should add, we think our game only goes to 10th level. You are already a hero at first level. You probably have some renown, depending on what kind of past you picked. And by 10th level, you will be close to a demigod, like a Thor from Marvel Comics type character. The reason we picked, or Hercules is another example we use a lot. The reason we picked 10 levels is it is a nice round number, and we aren't interested in selling you the fantasy of being a high-level character where you read the book and you think, ooh, look what I'll be able to do at max level. And then you dream and sigh, and you go back to being 3rd level, and you play for 20 years, and you play in a dozen campaigns, and you never get past 13th level. No, you want that fantasy, go play some other game. We want the reality of being able to get to max level in a reasonable amount of time. Say, 1 level per adventure, an adventure being 32 to 64 pages. Anyway, 10 levels, first level, you are already a hero. In this case, you are a tactician with either a mark or a taunt. A mark is just you pointing at someone and saying, attack that one. Like the wizard in the back, or the leader, or whatever. The necromancer who commands these undead. So if we can bring them down, maybe all these zombies will collapse? Classic. So mark that necromancer, and then, depending on how you customized your tactician, maybe the players all get a boon, which is a D4. They add to their attack roll. And remember, in our game, your attack roll is your damage roll. So maybe your allies get a boon when they attack the enemy you marked, or maybe they get free movement toward that enemy when you mark them. Or probably it does 1 at first, and then it gets better as you level up, and it does even more cool stuff. A taunt is sort of the opposite of a mark. Instead of saying, hey everyone, attack that guy, you point to that guy and you say, attack me. It's not a magical compulsion. They can do whatever they want. But you're a tactician. You are a master of tactics and strategy. And if you get in someone's face, they can't ignore you without some penalty. I have run this as a player and as a director, and I like it both ways. Your mom likes it. Anyway, even as a director, when the tactician taunts one of my monsters, I like thinking about how smart is this monster? Will they just eat the penalty and attack someone else? Or alternatively, how important is it that my hobgoblin death captain attack the squishy rogue? Sometimes it's fun to say, nah, this gnoll is going to ignore you and let the tactician do their cool thing when you ignore them. Also, the fact that our game is explicitly played on a grid, I think all VTT maps come with gridded versions, and movement and knockback is important. It creates a more tactical play space, and you get these really cool cinematic moments that come out of that. I was playing a tactician in a recent playtest. I was having fun. The class was cool, but there was this one ability called Forward with, an exclamation point and everything. And it's my most expensive ability, 6 focus. Focus is the tactician's heroic resource. Every class has one of these. They all work differently. They all have different names, different functions. We went through quite a long phase where we thought, no, there should be rules for the heroic resource that every class follows, because then the game is easier to learn, more standardized. And that has value. That's not a bad idea, but it meant the classes all felt really samey, which wasn't fun. And it meant that when we had really cool ideas for how this one heroic resource could work, we had to bash it into shape and make it conform to all the others. And it's like, but that was cool. That was a cool idea. What happened to it? So we finally bit the bullet and went in the total opposite direction, which is, by the way, how the Illrigger and the Beast Heart and the Talent work in 5th edition. The Illrigger has a kind of curse they place on enemies called a seal, which is a limited resource. The Beast Heart's pet generates ferocity the Beast Heart uses to fuel their cool abilities. And, as you now all know, the Talent has strain. And all those things work super differently from one class to the other. So even though it means, yes, each class is really different and has its own rules, it also means each class gets to be its own thing. The design serves the fantasy. It serves play. It serves fun. It's the whole point. So focus is the tactician's heroic resource, and it represents the idea that as the battle goes on, everything becomes clearer and clearer to the tactician. The battle becomes solvable. Everyone else is running around full of ferocity or fury or strain, and things are getting crazier and crazier, but you are getting more intense, more directed, more focused. The tactician is the professional. My tactician's most expensive ability was Forward, where I grant my entire team free movement. Sounds awesome, but it is surprisingly situational. We'd been through like 6 combats and I had never used it. The situation just never came up. It affects all my allies, but by the time I had 6 focus, most of my allies were already in position. So I never used it. I was doing other cool stuff. Now, another point, our ideas for these classes are very real, but the specifics of these abilities are all in flux. Mostly we're testing stuff like the math of the game, the action economy, the difference between what makes sense on paper and what is actually fun to play. This means we need some classes to test, and James, our lead designer, does that. He makes prototypes of these classes, but they're not the real thing. So maybe the real tactician won't have Forward, or maybe it'll work differently. That's just iteration and polish. I believe the difference between a good game and a great game is iteration and polish, and that's what our patrons' support makes possible. Anyway, I was starting to think that Forward needed to be revised or replaced, and maybe it does, we'll see. But then we had a boss fight against some hobgoblins, and this was a real challenge, very nasty. And my tactician is doing their best. I believe my character's name is Lorik, and I was using this character art from Patrick Hell, special to MCDM. Very cool preview of final art from the game. But I don't know, is this our tactician or is this a censor? We'll see. This would also be a great illustration of the Shining Armor kit. The hobgoblins have this front line of warriors who are boxing us in while their death captain is performing some ritual, and there's snipers, and it was really tough. It looked and felt like a classic medieval warfare scene with both sides just going, looking for any tactical opening. Well, at one point, our elementalist finishes casting Firestorm and really badly damages the hobgoblins and kills a couple of them, including the one in front of me. This is the opportunity I needed. I break out from the scrum, I burn some focus for some extra movement, run across the battlefield, and attack the Death Captain. This generates more focus, and now I've got more than enough, and I shout, "Forward!" And in an instant, all the other heroes all break out of the line of battle. They move to intercept the snipers who'd been shooting us the entire time. They move to attack the other hobgoblins. James was looking at his notes, and when he looked back, the battle had completely changed. Instead of us being boxed in, now they were surrounded. It was tactical, it was cinematic as hell. It felt like watching an epic movie, and I wasn't done. Forward, let the Shadow, spoilers, let the Shadow also get into melee with the Death Captain. But the Shadow is very squishy, so I took my leftover focus and taunted the Death Captain. He wanted to attack the Shadow, but no, he has to deal with me. And I had 2 extra focus left over, so I healed the Shadow with my "there's still work to do" ability. I'm a leader class, I have a little healing. It was awesome. It was really cool. The forward ability was very situational. It was cool, but the situation had just not come up yet. And James wasn't trying to make it happen. He was just running the hobgoblins. Just, normal flea mortal stuff. Just do what it says on the card and your players will think you're a tactical genius. So that's the Tactician. Still lots of work to do, but already fun, already very useful, already feels like a leader type. And you can see how what I did completely changed the tide of battle, but it wasn't about my DPS. I'm not a DPS class. Still fun. The Tactician will be one of our core classes, and I want to define our terms a little. Once the book comes out, we'll probably think of all the classes in the rulebook as the core classes. The classes in the core rules. Makes sense. But right now, we have a short list of classes we think of as core, by which we mean universal donors. You might have your own world that you enjoy running in, and we don't know anything about that world. Maybe it's classic medieval fantasy, maybe it's urban intrigue fantasy, maybe it's space fantasy, but it doesn't matter. A Tactician will fit in any fantasy game. That's what we mean by universal donor. Fits in any campaign. Certainly the most popular class right now is the Shadow. Basically a home run from the first prototype. The testers all seemed to love the Shadow, and it was fun to make. The Shadow is our thief rogue archetype, and there's 2 reasons we went with Shadow rather than thief or rogue. First, and most importantly, it's cool. It is a cool name for what you were doing. Second, while the Shadow is not a spellcaster, they use magic to do cool, thiefy, roguey stuff, currently called the Black Ash Sorcery. It's like a magical technique they teach you in fantasy thief school. Rogues that are just some asshole with a dagger, that's cool, but we think being able to use sorcery to enhance your skullduggery is cooler. Maybe when you specialize, you choose which magic thief discipline you learn. Maybe there are others besides the Black Ash Sorcery. Maybe not, we'll see. But let's talk about why the Shadow is a hit so far. I think the Shadow is so popular, not because they do a lot of damage, but because their shit just works. It's more about reacting and positioning than doing damage, even though it is a DPS class. For instance, you know how initiative currently works in our game. There's a roll to see which side goes first, then one of them takes their turn, then one of us takes our turn. And the only question is, who, among the people who haven't acted this turn, is going to go next? This is working pretty well, though it might get more nuanced later, we'll see, but it's doing what we wanted, which is it's encouraging players to strategize and work like a team. Okay, you go now, so that on my turn I can... That is already working. Well, the Shadow has an ability called Hesitation is Weakness. It's a good name. That lets them take their turn immediately after an ally goes. It's the only way right now for one hero to act immediately after another without letting the bad guys go in between. No roll, it just works. Now, there are whole encounters that go by without the Shadow using this. It's situational, but when they do it, it feels epic. And the name helps, I think. When the director says, okay, now the Gnoll Shaman is going to go, Shadow players like saying, no, hesitation is weakness. I go now. Similarly, the Shadow has an ability called, in all this confusion, it's a triggered action, which means they can only do it once per round, where a round is everyone taking a turn. The trigger is an enemy enters a square adjacent to the Shadow, and the action is the Shadow teleports away and damages whoever was dumb enough to stand next to them. They also have a regular short-range teleports, just 3 squares, but they can power it up with the Shadow's heroic resource, Doom. More Doom means more damage. You gain Doom whenever an enemy dies, unless it was a minion. Minions are the exception to tons of stuff. And you get more Doom if you were the one to kill them. You also get doom at the end of each encounter, so you start the next encounter with some doom already saved up. Now, you may see some people in the comments say, oh, ooh, doom, super cool. And some people who think that's too goth a term or whatever, too grim dark. But it's the same with everything we do. The more evocative something is, the stronger the reaction, positive and negative. And nothing is final. Who knows? Maybe there's a better name than Doom for the Shadow's resource. Probably not, but maybe. The Shadow is popular with our testers, and that points in a certain direction. Yes, the Shadow can do a lot of damage. They have an ability called Assassinate that, well, it does what it says on the tin. But that's not why people like playing the Shadow. And this is important. Most RPGs have two ways to deal with an incoming attack: avoidance and mitigation. This is something we've been hammering on now for a couple of weeks, which is actually ironic as we had sort of already solved it with the Shadow. Avoidance, and now we're getting into some real game design nonsense. Avoidance is what it says, avoiding incoming damage, avoiding it completely. Also known as you miss, right? We all know how that works. In D20 games, your armor class is your avoidance rating. Attackers need to beat that number or they do nothing. Well, when you're running an army, one soldier missing is no big deal. But when that roll means you waited 20 minutes to take your turn, and now you have to wait another 20? Not everybody loves that experience. It's fine maybe when we were teenagers who had all the time in the world and we played several times a week, often for 6 hours at a go. But once you've got like a job and you need sleep and shit, come on. Mitigation is your hit points. Hit points allow you to absorb the damage you couldn't avoid, so you can keep fighting. Indeed, the only reason they're called hit points is because they once measured how many times you could get hit, back when there were no damage rolls. 4 hit points meant you could take 4 hits before you went down. But remember, that was in wargaming, so it wasn't you go down, it was you pick up that one model and put it away. Well, we don't have avoidance. If somebody attacks you, you're going to take damage, and the only question is, how well do they roll, and how much does my defense reduce that damage? That's based on your stats, and it adds up. But it's not enough to block all incoming damage, even if the attacker rolls badly. Now, we do think that you'll be able to avoid effects. We do think there will be something like a saving throw. We currently call it your resistance roll. That is literally what we've been working on the past couple of weeks. But originally, and for a few months, there was a way to avoid damage, but it was very math heavy and noodly, and it slowed the game down. That was the counterattack idea, which turned into countering. It was very cool and fun, and it didn't work. We went into this on the Patreon, and you'll probably get a whole video about this here later. But for this video, you just need to know that there was a period where avoidance was weird and hard to do, and we were worried we weren't going to be able to support that character who is just hard to hit. Rogues, bards, swashbucklers, monks, just I'm highly agile and I get out of the way. I was worried about this a lot, which is very weird because we already had the Shadow. James was the one who pointed this out. It's stupid that I didn't see it. Avoidance and mitigation are still important. We're still noodling on that right now, but remember, one of the keywords is tactical. Avoiding all damage because of a number you wrote down when you made your character, armor class, that's not very tactical. But the Shadow was already avoiding quite a lot of damage just through their own mobility and resource management, and that felt extremely tactical. That's why the Shadow was a hit. You have a teleport, but it costs you doom. You have in all this confusion, but it's a triggered action, only once per round. Gotta plan a little, pay attention, use it at the right time, don't waste it. And they have other cool abilities I haven't even talked about. In other words, just playing the Shadow, just using their abilities, which you want to do because they have these cool names. You feel like someone actually getting out of the way of swords and spells and arrows. Because you are. It's cool, it's fun. MCDM, everybody. The first time we saw somebody play a Shadow, and this was months ago, it was my friend Lars, and I sort of made the Shadow for him. By which I mean he likes playing thief-type characters. But when he discovered the D20 thief is just a normal dude with a dagger, he was really disappointed and he couldn't figure out, why would you make the class this way? So he spent his time trying to make a Franken class that did what he wanted with multiclassing, but eventually gave up. So I didn't literally make this one class just for this one person. I just saw what happened and I thought, that is a cool archetype. It's one I have played in tons of games. It is appropriate for the game we're making. Let me see if I can tackle it. And Lars was very happy with the result. He even said so.
I am very happy with the result.
It's great. It was breathtaking watching Lars play the Shadow for the first time because the kind of player he is, he instantly saw how all these abilities fit together. He instantly realized how he had to read the battlefield. No, don't use in all this confusion on that dude. He's just a wanker. Wait for the boss to come at you. He would deliberately use assassination early on the boss. And when the boss would come at him, well, in all this confusion, he slipped away. It'll be a challenge making every class at every level that straightforward, fun, give them cool synergies. But I have played Tacticians and Talents and Furies in this game, and they are already fun enough. They are already cool. But having this one home run, it's really useful for us. It gives us a benchmark to judge the other classes by. They're not all going to be awesome in the same way. That's impossible. But it's nice to know something is working really well so we can look at it and try to understand why. Then we take what we learn and apply it to all the other classes. That's it for now, folks. We got a crowdfunding campaign to launch for this game in just a few weeks. Sign up link below. But this video is already long enough and there's lots more to talk about. We'll get back to the class design soon. There's tons more cool stuff to talk about. But next up, I think we're going to talk about weapons and armor, aka gear versus kits. Until then, folks, come by the Patreon, come by the Discord, click on the link to get an alert when the crowdfunder goes live in December. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for going on this crazy journey with us. It is amazing that we get to do this. It is amazing that our patrons are funding our current development. And I think this game is going to be extraordinary. And that's going to be because of your support. Until next time, folks, peace out.